What is really mine? When can one say that one owns something? Welcome to an original exploration of everyday moral dilemmas with philosopher Dr. Clancy Martin and spiritual guide Daaji.
I was recently in the Dholadar mountain range in the lower Himalayas during the first phase of the lockdown for the coronavirus in India. But then we had the good luck to find a landlord who happened to have a tuck shop, the shop where you could buy, all kinds of basic needs. And I may have mentioned him before in these lectures. His name was Jeswant Paul. And so we're living essentially behind the shop. And so in the morning, every morning really, it became part of my routine to walk over during the 2-hour period where we were allowed to leave the apartment, to walk over to Jeswant Paul's and to get whatever we might need. Some, breakfast cereal, some honey. He had bees and made this wonderful honey, some tea. He had a variety of things. And now the question that I want to ask is, if I walked over to Jeswant Paul's shop and Jeswant Paul happened to be looking the other way and he had some fresh grapes out, would it be morally appropriate for me to take one of Jeswant Paul's grapes and eat it? And all of us think, well, why would you do such a thing, Clancy? Of course not. I mean, you just turn to your friend and say, hey, Jeswant Paul, may I have one of your grapes? And then it will be up to him either to give you the grape, which is his grape, after all, not mine. Or to say, of course, take, which is what Jeswant Paul I'm sure would do. He'd say, take half a kilo of grapes, take a pound of grapes, and I'll put them on your bill and take some back to Amy and Ratna. And that's what I would have done. Of course, I would say, Jeswant Paul, can I buy some of your grapes? And he would say, yeah, of course, how much do you want? And in those situations, in small, intimate situations where we're dealing with property among friends and family, and it is clear whose property is whose, normally we don't have problems because we all feel that, okay, I know this is yours and not mine. And we still run into problems with sharing, and you get arguments with your siblings or whatever about, no, this is mine, or why aren't you sharing this with me, etc. Of course, all those kinds of debates, but there's no question about the ethics of whether or not you should take something that's not yours. We all just know it's wrong to do. But now let's make it a little more complicated and still very concrete. Suppose you're in a vast supermarket and part of a multinational conglomerate that is worth billions and billions of dollars. Here in Kansas City where I live, it would be Whole Foods. I'm in a Whole Foods. Now, Whole Foods gets lots of my money. We spend hundreds, probably thousands of dollars with Whole Foods maybe every month. Certainly thousands and thousands of dollars every year. Now, let's say I'm in Whole Foods and I see this grape and I'm a little bit hungry. I'm wanting a grape. I kind of feel like, Whole Foods often puts out free samples. They certainly won't mind me taking a grape. Whole Foods gets tons of my money. Lord knows Whole Foods can afford for me they're not going to miss the grape. And in a way, it's kind of advertising for them. If I take a grape and I eat it and I think, wow, what a delicious grape, I'm likely to buy some grapes. So am I really making a moral error in taking that grape, which is not my grape? It's Whole Foods grape, and I know it's Whole Foods grape as I take it.
So can there truly be a justification for taking another one's property? In Indian mythology, we have the example of Lord Krishna, who as a child would steal butter. Is that really morally condemnable?
There's a beautiful story that goes back to 1930s. Mayor LaGuardia was in the reigns of New York City. A 60-year-old woman was caught stealing a loaf of bread, and she was brought to the bench for trial in New York. It was sometime in January of 1935. Bitterly cold, at the time after the Great Depression, when New York City and the whole country rather was in the midst of wave of hunger and homelessness for several thousands, millions perhaps. When she was asked why she stole the bread, the old lady replied, that it was not for herself, though she was also visibly starving, but because she wanted to feed her starving grandchildren. Her situation was so dire that she was left with but no option. Mayor LaGuardia, who was in the seat of judge, told her that she would be charged of the crime and would have to pay $10 fine. To which the lady cried out and she says, if she had $10, she would not have stolen the bread in the first place. And if she were arrested, then what would become of her grandchildren and her daughter, who was also bedridden and could not look after the children? Mayor LaGuardia then smiled and took the required amount from his own pocket and extended it to the old lady, saying, here is your fine being paid, and you are henceforth released and free to live. To the indignant crowd who had begun staring at this, he said, each one of you are to pay a fine of 50 cents each, a fine for the crime of indifference towards needy. What kind of a community are we if destitute old woman has to reduce herself to stealing for survival of her grandchildren? His action, created a wave of charitable behavior in New York. So that one wonders, is it charity or duty to take care of the poor, needy, and destitute? Is it not something one should be doing naturally? Is the act of stealing, in such a case, something as the old grandmother did, condemnable? So the crime of theft, in order to be considered a theft, has to be studied in its context. How does a stealing of a loaf of bread is different from stealing tax money, something that you owe to the government, and you somehow manipulate it and end up paying only, let us say, $750? Something like that had happened earlier. Take, for example, the case of our past president, Donald Trump. He says it is his smartness that he could evade those taxes. He says you need intelligence, and that's why you should vote for persons like me, because you need intelligence. So when you deviate such sort of personality, when you deviate such sort of truth, when you manipulate truth, you are playing with fire. See, it's not easy to lead such a life. But to some people, I think where the conscience itself has gone berserk, where your conscience doesn't bite you anymore, what do you do? Where is the limit where you can say now this person is corrigible? If person is incorrigible, what to do? I often wonder, the man-made laws, are they superior to what we call divine laws? Divine laws are something far more superior, moral laws. Is it okay, for example, to evade taxes? Taxes, they're man-made laws. But when it comes to morality, it becomes my job, my duty, that if I have to serve some another citizen who is in need, and if I can, I have to go over and above, besides paying taxes. And if I know someone is suffering, I should somehow extend my help based on my capacity and based on the deservingness of an individual. It happened a long time back, sometime in 1994, when I was a supervising pharmacist in one of our drugstores. There was one gentleman. I wouldn't call him a gentleman, but he came with a jacket, big jacket, and he filled up his sleeves, you know, with bottles of Tylenol and Bufferin and Anacin, and he had buttons all the way here. So his sleeves became the bags. One customer caught and brought it to our attention. Mr. Patel, someone is stealing your stuff. So we had to catch him and hand him over to the police. Another scenario where a person comes and says, Mr. Patel, I don't have medicine for my child. I need this so badly. I don't have money. Would you give it to me? I said, with all pleasure, you take it. You pay me when you can. There's another beautiful scenario where a young boy who just came and handed over me $20 bill. And he had no merchandise in his pocket. I said, what are you paying? I mean, what are you purchasing today? He said, nothing, sir. Once when I didn't have money, I took some medicine from your shelf without telling you. I just took it. And I felt so bad. It's almost a year later that I'm in front of you. And you could see literally tears oozing from his eyes. Now, when we come across such incidences where there are some justifiable acts which are legally not right, but morally strong, I often base all this and arrive at a simple conclusion based on the suggestions of my master. He would greatly explore this idea of what is legitimate action and what is illegitimate action. And he puts it so beautifully. He would say that that act is sinful or really bad in performing, in which there is fear, agitation, and shame. And that act is virtuous in performing, in which there is fearlessness, courage, and valor. So, based on this, I think we can make certain principles in life which are not so rigid, but they are so fluid. In Indian scenario, where Lord Krishna as a child used to steal butter from houses, can we not also classify this as a theft or a stealing? I would not think so, because you are waiting to give away something to someone. In that society of that period, when the family member was eagerly waiting that let this boy come and take away some butter from my house. It was such a joyful act for them. So I do not consider that as a theft. Sometimes we leave the candies in front of the house for children to take it. Is it a theft? No. But children, just because they are so shy, they will quietly come and take it. But as a distributor of those sweets, you don't feel bad about it. It is something that goes on with life in your childhood.
In Western philosophy, the first great philosopher on the question of property is an English philosopher by the name of John Locke, English philosopher and physician. And John Locke advocated what has come to be called the labor theory of property. And it's quite simple, and this is how it works. How he asks the question, a profound, deep question: how does something become ours rather than someone else's? It's an interesting question, because you think about why something is yours. It's a little bit odd, isn't it? Why is it yours rather than someone else's, particularly if someone else might need it more than you do? Or if you inherited it, all these sort of like, how does it become mine? How do I have a rightful claim to it? And it was a particularly poignant question during John Locke's time, because at John Locke's time, they were still operating in England with a medieval system of the distribution of property, where the vast majority of the property was owned, particularly land, was owned by these feudal lords, and then they had people working the property who didn't own it, and yet were producing, at that time it was mostly farming, producing all of the wealth really of the property, the crops, and were extremely poor. And John Locke looked at this situation and he thought to himself, this is really unjust. It's unfair, it's wrong. Why was it wrong? Well, he had an explanation for why. He said, where property, the only thing that makes sense as to how something becomes ours is when we invest our work in that thing. So any particular thing that you claim to be your own is an expression in one way or another of your work. Now, in an advanced capitalist society, now at John Locke's time, of course, this was a radical revolutionary idea, and in fact, it was a central idea that led to many of the famous revolutions in the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe and in America, and then Mahatma Gandhi in India appealed to Locke's theory of property when he was making his revolutionary arguments about the Indians' legitimate moral imperative to overthrow British rule of India, among many other arguments. Because if property is yours as a consequence of your work, and you are the one working the land, on John Locke's account, then you really are the one who owns the property. If the corn wouldn't be there without your labor, or the cotton wouldn't be there without your labor, then as a consequence of your labor, you own that cotton, not the person who is telling you this is my land and you have to produce that cotton for me.
So when can one truly say that something is mine? When do we own something?
Sometimes I feel like laughing and say always, but this is out of a joke. Mindness, ownership, or sense of belonging are functional to our existence. If you belong to a certain kingdom or a nation or a community, that does not mean you own them. You may belong, but you don't own them. Sense of belonging can either make you sad or happy depending upon to whom actually you belong. If you belong to a society, right wing or left wing, how would you be looked upon by your opposite groups? So these are all relative values. There are situations in life where one finds that legally so and so is not mine. Yet there is a greater sense at a moral level of calling that entity as your very own. This is truer in the emotional world. The laws in the materialistic world are more or less carved on a stone. It is always in black and white. Yet they may not at all level be relevant as far as morality is concerned. Here comes a dire, rather challenging situations where you are at a crossroad, where man-made laws and nature's principles or divine laws come to play. Imagine for a moment if pharaohs of Egypt were to wake up from their deep sleep and come to life from those mummies and claim that the land of Egypt belonged to them. There was once a debate during an United Nations Assembly where hot issue of Kashmir was brought up by the representative of Pakistan. The Indian representative shared a story, very humorous story though, that once it happened that sage Kashyap, he happened to be some millennia old personality, was taking bath in the freely flowing, lovely, crystal clear, pure water of gentle waterfall in those mountains. He was basking in the pool of water. He left his clothes on some nearby tree. After he finished his bath, he could not find it. So, investigation was launched. Witnesses found that some Pakistani had stolen his clothes. The Pakistan representatives were vehemently opposing this idea and were insisting that the Pakistan as a nation did not exist when Sage Kashyap was around. Indian spokesman very easily said, I quote, precisely, ladies and gentlemen, that is what I'm trying to say, unquote. There are many areas on the world map with lots of such stories. Unfortunately, if we try to redo the map, we may have to perhaps face Third World War. Often the clashes amongst the siblings are painful to watch. What I would do? I would say to my sisters and brothers, take what you need. For me, our relationship, our mutual love is far more important. All religions advocate one thing: nothing is yours. In the end, thou shalt turn to ash. Spirituality demands that we resist identifying ourselves with the objective world. Nevertheless, while we are here, we must respect the man made laws for mutual benefits.
Now, in an advanced market economy like the ones we all live in, advanced capitalist society, a contemporary complex capitalist society, I really should say, the things that we own, whether it's a camera that's recording us, or a microphone, or a suit jacket, or a bed, or a house, or whatever it is, very often we won't have put any work directly into these things. Don't know how to make a microphone, couldn't if I tried. Similarly with a suit jacket or a shirt or a pair of glasses. But nevertheless, we may say that these are representations of my work because it is my work and the work of my partner that created the symbolic, that symbolic representation of work we use in our societies, that is money, cash, these mysterious entities that we use to transfer property from one to another, that are rupees, dollar bills, whatever they happen to be. Those symbolic representations of our work have been translated into actual physical objects. But still, as I look around, I see things that have come to me as a consequence of the work that I have done, or that my partner Amy has done, and that's how we come to own these things. Some of the things around us also are representations of work that other people have done who are related to us, that we inherited from people. And that gets complicated. But now what about that grape back at Whole Foods? Is that grape a representation of work that I have done? No, that is entirely someone else's grape. I didn't do any work related to that grape whatsoever. I can make that grape an object of my work if I pay for it. Then we're engaging in a transfer where part of what is being transferred was my work in exchange for someone else's work. But what I am doing if I take that grape is I'm stealing someone else's labor. And there's all kinds of work that has gone into that grape arriving at Whole Foods. It's not just the vast, complex system of labor that sustains something like Whole Foods. It's also the original growing of the grape. It's the nurturing of that soil. It's the picking of the grape by some worker. It's the grape getting on the truck and traveling. It's the fuel that went into the truck. It's this vast network of labor of others that has gone into that grape. So the grape may seem insignificant, but it's tremendously significant, morally speaking, because it is the representation of so much work. So when I take that grape, I'm really, really doing something very morally blameworthy. Furthermore, little fallouts of this, I'm providing an example to the people around me. Other people can look and say, oh, look at that guy. He looks like a fine, upstanding citizen. They may or may not think that. Or maybe they've been a student of mine. Oh, that guy's a philosophy professor, and I just saw him take a grape. It must be okay for me to take a grape. He must have some argument in his head that goes something like, well, Whole Foods is exploiting or overcharging, or Whole Foods is up to some kind of chicanery, so he's allowed to take it's a little rebellion of his to take that grape. No, there are certainly important ways of challenging the systems of property distribution in which we find ourselves, and we may have occasion to talk about those over the course of these lectures. But one of them is not stealing. Stealing is not an appropriate way to deal with this question, not a morally appropriate way to deal with this question. That grape does not belong to me.
While it may be unacceptable to steal something from others, but what about when you are dealing with a thief? Is it okay to steal something from a person who has stolen it from somebody else?
I'm reminded of a beautiful Jamaican proverb. A thief steals from a thief. What does God do? He laughs. It's beautiful. Here too, the golden rule applies fittingly. Be it thief or be as honorable as you are. Stealing is stealing. Thieving is thieving. How would you feel when your bounty is taken away by someone? There are many stories and movies around such episodes. The classic story of Robin Hood has been much debated, isn't it? Was the legendary Robin Hood now become a powerful archetype of our times? Was he to be seen as a hero or a thief, or both as hero and a thief? Let us say you were living in Europe during the Second World War, and it was the time of the Nazi pogroms against the Jewish people. If you happen to be hiding some of those families in your home and the Nazi army came, when they come by, would you denounce the people you are hiding in your home? Would speaking the truth to the Nazis be morally higher than telling a conscious lie to protect the lives of those you are assisting in such a terrible time? Why the above example of not speaking the truth? Be it being untruthful or be a thief, it is always the higher principles of why you are doing what you are doing that would guide the inner compass. In short, end justifies the means. The above case, lying would mean saving lives that are very precious. And in that, we may find the compassion and clarity within ourselves to know what is right what is wrong in any given situation, even that of stealing or not stealing from thief. Follow your heart.
Now, one more point to remember about that grape comes to us from utilitarianism, and also has been popularized through a particular form of egoism. We've mentioned before the popular egoism of the writer Ayn Rand. Really what she is advocating is something that comes, is bequeathed to her, that she popularized, but is bequeathed to her by an economist and philosopher named Friedrich Hayek, among others. For these thinkers, every time you buy something, so long as the purchase of that thing isn't inflicting harm on someone, and this is why fair trade and these kinds of practices could be tremendously morally important, we want to be sure that the things we are buying have contributed to the flourishing of the people we are buying them from, wherever those people ultimately are. When we buy something because the person who is selling to us is a little bit happier for having sold it, so long as she or he is doing so freely, and we are a little bit happier from having purchased it, so long as we are doing so freely, then the collective happiness of our society has increased, and that's a very morally praiseworthy thing. And so when I do something according to this way of thinking, like taking a grape that doesn't belong to me, I might have temporarily increased my own happiness, but I have collectively decreased the happiness of everyone around me, because I haven't engaged in the transaction for our mutual benefit. I've engaged in the transaction solely for my own personal benefit. And there are others who are being harmed by that action, and our collective happiness is decreasing, and it's very clearly morally blameworthy.
While the act of stealing may have an impact on our lives, how does it affect our spiritual life? What is the spiritual impact of the act of stealing?
Let me answer this with another question. Suppose the president of the country manipulates his tax returns and everybody follows the same pattern. Then what will happen to such a country? This is also a kind of stealing, the country that supports your welfare. If a policeman or a judge or a professor somehow manipulates the paperwork and transfer the property to their family name, that's also a stealing. Just as acts, good or bad, has impact on individual consciousness, then acts of majority, be those acts really good or bad, will have the impact on multitude. This is how collective consciousness is viewed. Consequences of collective consciousness is reaping of collective happiness or misery. You know, all transactions ought to have mutual benefit for sure, including conversations. While I'm talking to you, you should benefit, I should benefit from this discussion. Even the aspects of romance, is it mutually benefiting? Let us first understand the law of karma, which is inexorable. What happens? Whatsoever I do, there will always be consequences, either equal or less, or returned in multitude. How karmas leave residual impact on our consciousness. A simple act of taking away the wings of a butterfly, and later on beheading a goat, and later on beheading something else, and later on it may turn out to be, you might one day behead a human being. This trajectory can be very painful. We have to watch our thoughts, we have to watch our actions. The impact of taking property that really does not belong to you can be potentially very harmful. Though you might enjoy the materialistic benefit, but you don't know where you are cutting short on your spiritual destiny. When one has the feeling that one has taken something that doesn't belong rightfully to them, even if one may express outer jubilance, the inner core cannot rest in peace. The conscience is a fine instrument and can capture regrets and guilt with great precision. When we feel the weight of a wrong action done in this manner, it is difficult to redeem ourselves. Guilt and regret, they settle as heavy vibrations in human psyche. Spiritually speaking, such burdens like guilt and remorse created by any action or thought, be it stealing or lying or cheating someone, they all settle on certain yogic chakras inexorably until they get a chance to become pure as it were before. Not only we remain burdened with such acts of stealing, but sometimes even acts of nobility can create hurdle in the weaving of our destiny. How so? Perhaps you might ask me that nobility creating hurdles. Let me give one example. Suppose you gave $100,000 to your friend. After many years, he still does not even give you any hint of returning your money. How would you feel? Such impressions will settle on your mind naturally, and you will certainly carry these in your next incarnation. What is the remedy? Give as much as you can afford to lose so that you don't have to worry later on. Otherwise, however liberated your state may be, but if you retain this much that I have given so much to somebody and I must get it back, then, my friend, your next birth is surely guaranteed. My great grandmaster Lalaji Maharaj gave a very sound counsel that defined a principle pertaining to not lending money that one expects to see returned to oneself. If we lend money or things that we expect to be returned, we too get entangled in the transaction, and the impressions thus formed can imprison me in that hold. There's one interesting episode from life of my master Babuji, where one of his disciples was on a deathbed. He was about to die but could not breathe his last so easily. He dragged on and on and on and on and on. And then my master went to him. He said, "You owed me some money. You promised to give me something. Now you give me 1 rupee, less than a dime perhaps, or less than a penny." This goes back in, suppose, 1966 or 67. It's a story of late 60s. So the old man requests one of his family members to bring 1 rupee and hands it over to Babuji. That settles the debt. He was able to breathe his last peacefully, instantly. The spiritual impact on the inner purity of our consciousness due to immoral acts such as thieving or speaking a terrible lie can be colossal, probably more than we perceive right away, and often it complicates our life to the extent of creating a snowball effect of repetitive patterns of guilt, loss of values, and loss of self respect. Our inner guidance is always present to tell us when we betray ourselves by behaving in a manner that is not in accordance with the inner voice or the divine principles. When we do so, we become our own enemies, our own judges, our own jailers. So, it is best to avoid such behavior even when no one is looking, or no matter what the value of the thing we are stealing. Taking that one grape from a mount can still weigh heavily on our inner self and inner purity, which once blemished is not so simply cleared or purified. Guilt free, pure heart, innocent heart is of a great value. The heartfulness practices can be a gift because it permits our inner compass to function with precision, giving us the moral strength to be able to follow the dictates of the heart. That alone, I think, can decide whether an action and its consequences are to be undertaken or not.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Daaji, and thank you, Dr. Clancy Martin, for those valuable insights into this fascinating topic. Thank you also to our listeners and viewers for joining us. Do join us again for the next episode of Compass. Until then, goodbye.